privileged to share some of my thoughts with you this morning, and certainly we've had a great foundation and baseline prepared for us in this discussion, so my goal will be to talk some about BVD Diagnostics. And as we consider BVD Diagnostics, if we had a room full of producers and we asked them the question, do you have BVD in their herd? Yes, no, or maybe. It's interesting to think about the information that they would use to answer that question. We've already talked some about India. Great comment about Dan Groom's work in India. Let's look at U.S. producers. We don't have to throw the stone very far, realizing there's this question, and it's already been brought up. We have this segmented industry. BVD, to the extent that there's never a calf born in a feed yard, trust me, I know the details of that, but just for a second, okay? Just for a second, let's imagine a world where there's not a calf born in a feedlot. To the extent that that is true, BVD PI animals, which are the linchpin of the maintenance of this virus in the population, occurs in the cow-calf segment. So the question has already been asked and discussed, and I found the discussion very interesting. Based on the economic impact on the cow-calf sector, why doesn't the cow-calf sector see clear motivation to have a comprehensive control program and eradicate BVD from that operation? A key aspect of that, in my limited perspective and knowledge, is that the cow-calf operation has no good way to test the calf until it hits the ground. We can talk about a lot of diagnostic tests. There's no good, reputable way to test that calf until it hits the ground. If the cow-calf producer cannot test the calf until it hits the ground, they already have 9 months of time invested into the product. They are 6 months away from delivery and sale of that product. For them to invest money testing that calf, it can be justified. It can be economically feasible. But you have to realize they're already more than halfway through the production process. They've got 9 months in, 9 months of gestation. They're 6 months away from sale and delivery. To tell them you test the product and you take the loss for not sending that product on through the industry, you're expecting one segment of the industry to not only pay for the testing, which when we realize that the individual animal prevalence is about 0.4%, so that's 4 in 1,000 are going to come up positive. So they're going to test a whole lot of animals and get a negative result. And every time, the psychology of the system is really interesting to me. Every time they test an animal that comes back negative, there's something in the back of their mind that says, why did I test? Because it was not there. Why did I listen to those folks tell me I should test? This animal didn't have it. And at the same time, we understand that when they do identify an animal, and Dan Groom said it well, a lot of these calves that are persistently infected are going to be Stumpy and Shorty and Nubby and all these bizarre names for this calf that's a poor doer. But inevitably, they will run into some calves that look very normal, that may actually be on the upper end of the phenotypic curve. And they're going to have a veterinarian standing there saying, I know this animal looks normal, I know this animal is growing well, but they are shedding and spreading virus in every aspect of any discharge that comes from that animal, and we need to euthanize the animal. So just trying to lay it out so that we're all clear on what we're asking this one part of the segment to do. Yes, to the extent that these animals can be produced, they are only produced, PI animals are only produced from pregnancy. That's some of the impetus behind this whole thing, okay? This is one of the few diseases that's very easy to blame on somebody else. Because once an animal is born, it cannot become a PI animal. So if you have a PI animal on your operation and you can know where it came from, you know who to blame. To the extent that we all like to blame somebody else, this is a great disease. as we think through this segmented industry that we have, it inherently creates a few challenges. This producer that we asked the question of, do you have BVD in your herd? Only 4.2% of our producers answer that with any knowledge from testing. Yes, this is from the NOM survey in 2007, 2008, so it's a few years old. I would hope that some things may have changed since that point in time. But if we talk about all producers, when you say, do you have BVD in your herd, you're going to have a lot of individuals say no, just like we talked about India earlier. They said, no, we don't have a problem with BVD. A lot of producers are going to say no. But of all of those producers that say no, if we look at producers from the Southeast, all size operations, only 4.2% have done any testing. You see the breakdown on the percent that's knowledgeable, the percent that had not heard of the situation before. Again, this was a few years ago. Has it changed some? I would hope that it has. Has it changed dramatically, especially if we talk about the number of producers that are testing? Boy, I would be hesitant to say that one has changed tremendously. The other aspect that I'll show you, it's totally appropriate to say, but Dan Gibbons, the real producers, the producers that are not doing it as a lifestyle decision, but are doing it as an economic means of support, are going to be a different demographic. I would totally agree with that. This survey also looked at producers that had more than 200 cows. In producers with more than 200 cows, we see that 15.6% of producers that have more than 200 cows are knowledgeable of the disease and have done some testing. So they're answering that question of, do you have BVD in your herd, with a true knowledge based on testing. Understand that other producers are often going to say, I don't have a problem with BVD. And boy, that's tricky. And I'll apologize in advance, I've had the privilege of working with BVD for a while, so I tend to anthropomorphize BVD just as many of the researchers in the room do, because it's such a respectable opponent. It's a virus that has mutated enough that we've seen it come out in some different areas. And can we see situations where BVD doesn't cause significant clinical disease on an operation? Yes, when it's a stable operation. The times when we see, and I'd love to be able to chart it, Dr. Peel showed you a nice chart of the changes in the cow numbers in the United States. When we see increases in the overall number of animals in the cow herd, that's when we see problems with BVD. And you can argue that, yes, that's when we see problems because we have infected animals that come onto a new farm. But the other thing that we need to understand clearly, there was a nice study in Greece several years ago that looked at a situation where there was a tremendous outbreak in these newly purchased dairy cows coming into this operation for expansion. As they brought these dairy cows into the operation for expansion, the newly purchased cows started breaking with BVD at the time of calving. And they had a 30% death loss in this group of new heifers coming in. So when you have recently made a huge purchase and you have a 30% death loss, that's a time to get the lawyers involved. So they immediately got the lawyers involved, and the lawyers said, well, first we need to do some testing before we go too far with this lawsuit. We need to test the strain of virus in the animals that are coming into your operation, and then we need to test the cows in your operation. And what that herd showed was that they had had BVD in their operation for multiple years. They had multiple PI animals in their stable herd that were not causing disease. But when they brought in these highly stressed dairy heifers shortly before they calved, this strain that had been inherent in the operation for a long period of time, not causing losses, infected those heifers coming in, caused a 30% death loss. The lawyer didn't get to go forward with the suit because the guy that bought the animals didn't buy the problem. He brought naive animals and brought them into the problem. So we have to understand that BVD can have situations where it is on the farm. It's not causing a huge disease outbreak on that farm under the current circumstances, but as soon as we go into the expansion mode, we create a real opportunity for BVD to cause a problem. So it's certainly interesting to look at it that way. The other thing I'll say, just as we talk about diagnostic testing, the intent to test for BVD is not the same as testing. The reason I make that statement is this is intriguing to me. In this NOM study, they were going to provide free testing, no cost as far as running the diagnostic test to the producer. There were 306 producers who said, if you'll pay for the test, it's totally free, I want to do the test. They ordered the kits. They had the kits shipped to them, and they never followed through. Only 205 out of 306 producers followed through. That's a 67% follow through when the testing and the shipping is free. Okay? So we all have to be honest. The intent to test for BVD is not the same as actually testing for BVD. We've mentioned this some. What's the herd prevalence of disease? And we can look at this a lot of different ways. If we look at 8 different studies, calculating some statistics on that, the mean herd prevalence through these different studies is 12.7%. So I commonly use the number to say that 10% of herds are going to have a persistently infected animal in the herd. Now, we all have to be clear, that's a good number, but the psychology of that is interesting. What that means is if you convince 10 producers that they need to test for BVD on their farm, and then you get them back together to vote on whether or not that was a good decision, 9 of them are going to say, we spent a lot of time, energy, and labor looking for a PI animal on our farm. We didn't find one. So when they go to voting about whether or not they should all test, 9 of them say, we spent time, energy, money, and tested, didn't have it on our farm. It wasn't a good use of our resources. The one individual farm did have it. Again, I apologize for putting it into the psychology, but this is a tough one when we understand the herd prevalence of 10%. Now, to the point where we start commingling animals from multiple farms, multiple source situation, you see the magnitude of amplification in the process. If we look at individual animal prevalence, we can look at that in a big way, but it's somewhere around the neighborhood of 0.4%, so 4 in 1,000. So I think that's totally appropriate to say that our management has to be focused on the herd level, on the management level, rather than the individual animal level. But at the same time, it's that individual animal, that persistently infected animal, that is shedding so much virus that it creates such an impact in the operation. That prevalence percent is going to change with time. Dan Grooms did a great job telling you that the animals that are persistently infected do tend to die earlier in life. Therefore, it's only cognizant that you'll see here when we have lower weight animals. So these are class weights across the bottom. When you see lower weight animals, you're going to see a higher prevalence of persistently infected animals. So if we're talking less than 300 pounds, you see on the chart 7 PI animals per 1,000. If we go up to greater than 900 pounds, we're pushing that down to 8 in 10,000 animals. So you see how the lower the weight class that we're talking about, the more persistently infected animals you're likely to find. It's considered that that's associated with the fact that those animals do have the tendency or the proclivity to die early in life. We'll often see producers, when they answer this question, do you have BVD in your herd? Most of them haven't tested. Most of them will say, no, I don't have BVD in my herd because I'm not seeing problems. I'm seeing high pregnancy rates. I'm seeing few aborted fetuses. I'm seeing no birth defects. I'm seeing excellent calf health. I don't have any diagnostic evidence for BVD. Therefore, the answer is often no. Understand, we'll see many producers, boy, especially if you talk to dairy producers, where pregnancy rates are a constant challenge when we deal with high milk production. If you ask a dairy producer, are you pleased with your pregnancy rates? You can almost always get them to say, I'd love to see that number go up some. So there's this question of, is BVD on the operation? We have to consider in the absence of evidence. The absence of evidence is not the evidence of absence. So you got to be careful with that. You can't just say it's not there. And then BVD virus is in the herd if virus, not antibodies, because in our current environment where appropriately we use lots of vaccines, the question of what does antibody mean can become very confusing. If you know an animal's not been vaccinated and that animal has antibodies, then we can say that that animal has encountered a field strain of virus at some point in time. But understand that the situation needs to be focused on the detection of virus. Why test? It's already been addressed some, but realizing if you're telling me Dan Gibbons, we're going to pay this cow-calf producer more for every animal that tests. It cost him anywhere from $3 to $5 per animal to test an animal. We're going to make sure that he has some degree of return on investment for that in a constant changing market situation. That's an easy sell to the cow-calf producers. That's really an easy sell. Unfortunately, sometimes the demand for animals to pull through the system is such that that's not a constant number. And maybe we're not certain exactly how big this magnitude is. So it becomes a little bit challenging. If the goal is to ensure that your herd is free of PI animals, that's a different paradigm. That's that purebred breeder who's needing to be able to say, my herd doesn't have BVD in the herd. I'm selling animals of high genetic value. I need to make certain that I'm not selling a problem to anybody else. Because of the liability, because of the easy traceability, boy, those purebred producers have to think about this. That's another subset of reasons for doing testing. And then we get into another situation when we're talking about a producer knows that they have virus circulating within a group of animals. They now need to identify which animals are persistently infected, spreading disease throughout the group. Several years ago, in the publication that Dan Grooms mentioned about BVD control programs that several of us got together and wrote, we came up with this methods to answer the question, is BVD circulating in the herd? There were least cost and least reliable methods, and there were more expensive and more reliable methods. If you observed for clinical disease and submitted samples from all aborted and underweight calves for BVD testing, that's better than just looking for disease. All the way down to submitting ear notches from young calves, non-calving females, and bulls for individual animal testing. That has the greatest reliability, realizing it also comes with significant focus and labor. The other question that you always hit with these operators, once they start on a BVD control program and they get it out of their herd, you're going to immediately hit the question, and Dan Grooms has heard it a lot of times, Doc, how long do I have to keep testing? I know there's not BVD in the operation. How long do I need to keep testing to show myself all of these negatives? And those are real questions that we have to deal with as an industry when we move toward a systematic control program, which I believe is where we need to head to. It needs to be systematic. It needs to be understood. But we need to be real and clear about what the challenges are in that system. So persistently infected animals are the source of ongoing exposure in herds with BVD virus. As long as the PI animal lives, they are an effective factory for the virus. They need to be identified and removed prior to the breeding season. Realizing Dan Grooms mentioned to us that the persistently infected animal is going to be formed somewhere between 20 days and 125 days of gestation. We need to work to do our testing and elimination of those PI animals within the group prior to that aspect of the gestational cycle. We understand where PI calves come from. Which tests should we do to detect PI cattle? We'll talk more about that in just a second. What's our strategy for testing? So you come down to some key questions about diagnostics. When should you do the test? Which cattle should you test? Let's talk about when you should do the test for a second. This is a southeastern herd that we'll diagram out here. You see the breeding season starts January 1. March, they're getting animals up. April, they're weaning calves. You see your calving season starts in October, runs hopefully to 1st of December. They're wrapped up before we start going back. Yeah, right? Isn't that how it goes? When do we do testing? We need to do the testing before we turn the bull in. Now, as soon as we go to South Florida and talk to the operators in South Florida, boy, the operators in South Florida tell us we just keep the bull out there with those cows all the time. We get up whatever calves we can out of the swamp, and they go through the market. When we talk about that producer in the hills of Tennessee and Kentucky, and we say, what's your controlled breeding season? He doesn't say it, she doesn't say it, but they're thinking, control, I can't keep the bull away from the cows. I don't have that level of fencing on the farm. So my controlled breeding season is to make sure my bull stays on my farm and doesn't get on the neighbor's farm. That's the control of the breeding season that we're talking about. So understand it's real easy for me to draw this diagram and say we've got to test animals that need to be tested before the breeding season. That's strategic. If you tell me I've got BVD in an operation and this operation has to maintain a 365-day breeding season, meaning there are animals at all levels of gestation at all times of the year, and there's no time of the year where you can tell me I don't have any pregnant animals. And Dr. Gibbons, I want you to control BVD on that operation. That's a mess. I'm going to say to you, well, let's get some vaccine. Let's use some vaccine. Understand vaccine's not going to provide 100% control because you can vaccinate a PI animal all you want, and that animal will stay PI. But if you tell me you cannot have a controlled breeding season, this whole game of us controlling BVD, boy, that's really, really difficult. We can maybe keep you from selling PI animals to somebody else, but as far as getting BVD out of your herd, if you don't have a controlled breeding season, that's going to be very difficult. This is adapted from Clayton Kelling and several years ago, but certainly still something that's helpful for us to talk through. We need to test animals pre-breeding. Who do we need to test? We need to test calves on the ground, bulls in the operation, and cattle meaning either heifers or cows that do not have calves. I want to go back to one thing that Dan Groom said. Dan Groom said, he showed you that nice picture of that Hereford cow that was PI that gave birth to that PI calf. Dan very appropriately said, this is rare. What he was meaning specifically was, it is rare to have PI animals look totally normal and get to appropriate age and condition and reproductively be able to produce a calf. That's rare. What Dan Grooms did not mean in any way, shape, or form is it's rare for a PI cow to produce a PI calf. A PI cow will always produce a PI calf. So this testing protocol diagrammed out by Kelling is really based off the principle, if you have a calf that you test and that calf tests negative for BVD, you know that the dam of that calf is not persistently infected to the degree that you have good records. To the degree that you have good records, you know if a calf tests negative, the dam of that calf is negative. So we can decrease the number of animals we test. We can test calves. We can test bulls. We can test heifers and cows without calves. If they're negative, they all stay in the herd. We know the status of all of those animals and the dams of those calves. If they're positive, if they're bulls and cattle without calves, they need to be sold immediately because they're the PI animal. We need to, and they need to be sold with identification. Okay? Y'all have all heard the stories. We get some great stories in this business. You have the producer who had PI cows. You talk through with that producer, look, you cannot sell these animals because of the liability involved with it. It's easily traceable. You can't sell these animals without identification. Yes, they can go to slaughter, but they should not be sold to another operation. You show up a month later on the operation, all the PI animals are gone. You ask him how things went. He said, Doc, they went great. He said, I sold them. Didn't sell them under my name, sold them under my wife's name. Nobody will be able to trace it. Yeah. So you got all these situations that are real that we have to deal with. Understand, if these are calves that are positive, we need to pull these positive calves and their dams from the herd before we start back in the breeding cycle. We need those animals out of the herd before we go back into breeding situations. I don't mean you have to immediately cull them because there's an important aspect here. If the dam of that calf, okay, is positive. So first let's talk, if we sell positive calves for slaughter, if we test an animal and it's persistently infected, classical definition of that would be 2 tests 30 days apart. Most of our current testing protocols give a clear indication that if we come up with a positive on some of these tests, it's most likely a persistently infected animal. Persistently infected calf need to get out of the herd. We need to test the dams. If the cow's positive, that's a PI cow that gave birth to a PI calf. A PI cow will always give birth to a PI calf. If we test the dam of a PI calf and it's negative, that's an acute infection during pregnancy that resulted in birth of a persistently infected calf. Just so you have some ballpark numbers to play with here, in one study several years ago, they looked at, of PI calves, 93% come from a dam that tests negative, meaning she was acutely infected with BVD. So 93% of PI calves don't have a dam that's PI. So it's wrong to short-circuit the cycle and say, if you got a PI calf, you need to get rid of that cow too. 93% of the time, that's the wrong answer. At the same time, the numbers would indicate that 7% of persistently infected calves do have a dam that is also persistently infected. So we need to do the testing. We need to remove the persistently infected animals from the operation. Now the question, which test should I use on the operation? A lot of different tests out there. Okay, there are some things that are good for us to discuss, and that is you have to look at the economics. You have to look at the economics of the situation. There are different things that we can do or that can be done in a diagnostic laboratory to decrease the cost. Most of those same things that decrease the cost will also decrease the analytical sensitivity. But the flip side of that is most of the time, persistently infected animals are producing so much virus that it's not that difficult to detect them. We're talking about 10 to the 6th, 10 to the 7th cell culture infective doses of virus per ml. So a lot of virus in many of these samples. So a lot of different tests that we can do. The answer to which test you should do, I think, has more to do with a couplet question. And the couplet question is, who are you having doing the testing? Because depending on who you're having do the testing and what test they do can really help you answer both questions simultaneously. To best give you information and evidence on that, I go back to a study that was done in 2007 by Misty Edmondson at Auburn University. In essence, we contacted a lot of different diagnostic labs at that point in time. And the question to the diagnostic labs is, what samples would you like for us to send you? We're going to send you 10 samples. We know from these 10 samples how many of them are persistently infected. We're asking you to be involved in the study. It's no cost to you. We'll send you the samples. We will handle the samples however you want. We will take whatever samples you want. So we had a group of persistently infected animals, a group of negative animals. We're going to collect samples however they want. We're going to ship them however that lab wants. We looked at 890 different test results for the 23 different laboratories that willingly participated, understanding fully what was going on in this situation. Those labs ran a lot of different tests. Okay, some ran immunohistochemistry on skin, some ran antigen capture ELISA on serum and skin, some ran virus isolation on serum, virus isolation on white blood cells, PCR on serum, PCR on white blood cells. We didn't have any of the labs at the point in time that we did this. Once we told them what they were doing, they didn't want to play the pooling game. And I say that just for what it was. At the point in time that we were doing this, we said, this is what we're going to do with you. We're going to send you samples. What do you want to do? The labs that we contacted at that point in time had no interest in having us send them pooled samples. So we should understand that some of these are very cost appropriate for individual animals. Immunohistochemistry on skin, antigen capture ELISA on skin, very cost appropriate for individual animals. I should mention that we have several of these that have the potential to be affected by cholesterol antibodies. IHC on skin less so. We have some things, you see things circled on the slide here that are not affected by cholesterol antibodies. So the serum or white blood cell tests that could be run are often affected by cholesterol antibodies. So going back to what we said 93% of the time the PI calf is going to be out of a dam that is not PI. That dam has had several months of exposure to a fetus that is producing virus within her. Her antibody titers will very clearly be higher than a normal exposed animal. In Europe, in environments where they don't do any vaccination, they can use that difference to try to detect gestating animals that are carrying a PI fetus in the United States with all the different vaccination protocols that we use, it's really not feasible for us to try to say with certainty that this animal has a higher level of antibodies, therefore the fetus is more likely to be persistently infected. I say all of that simply to say there will be lots of antibodies in the colostrum of that animal. Colostral ingestion can create some challenges for some tests. Those that you see circled here are minimally affected by colostral antibodies. Some are appropriate cost for individual animal testing. The take-home from this study, I'm not going to tell you which lab is which, so please don't even come up and ask me that. But we sent samples to labs A through W. Lab A ran every test available. Lab A is a very well-known laboratory in the United States. They got 100% of the samples correctly positive, 100% of the samples correctly negative, regardless of which test they ran. So all of the tests can be performed accurately and reliably. Then let's talk about Lab W at the bottom of the chart. Lab W ran all the tests. Okay, they ran all the tests. For immunohistochemistry, on the 10 samples that they were sent, they got none of the positive samples correct. So they had a 0% correct positive. They called everything negative. So if you call everything negative, you're going to get the ones that are negative to be negative. Antigen capture ELISA serum, they got 0% correct positive again. They made the antigen capture ELISA test on skin look good. That was the only test they couldn't mess up. I say that to say that antigen capture ELISA on skin is a robust test. However, I don't think this study shows that there's a certain test that's better or worse. I do believe this test shows you need to develop a relationship with the diagnostic lab you're sending samples to. You need to ask them if they've run some samples that are available nationally to validate their testing. At the end of the day, when we look at all of the different tests, Lab A, doesn't matter what test you're talking about, they're 100% correct positive, they're 100% correct negative. Lab W, 43% correct positive. Save your money and flip a coin. Save your money and flip a coin. Again, I say all that simply to say develop a relationship with that laboratory, ask them some of those tough questions, make sure you're handling the samples the way they want you to handle samples, because you can certainly mess this thing up. As a veterinarian, there's often that real frustration and the real challenge. You work with a producer who was banking on the fact that they were going to get all negative animals. They come up with the positive, and then you realize they're not going to do anything. They did all of this testing. They were only hoping to prove to other people that they were negative, and they got a persistently infected animal in the group. First, they begin the questioning with, if I get a positive, how sure am I that the calf is PI? No test anywhere. No test is 100% sensitive and specific. Okay? No test is going to be right every single time, all the time. So, sure, retest an animal if you question whether or not it's truly positive. I think that makes a lot of rational sense, is very much appropriate. If you get a negative, how sure am I that that calf is not PI? You're pretty sure. The tests are good. There's no test that's 100%. So if you get a valid test, one valid test, notice the implementation of the word valid in that statement, one valid test will result in you having assurance that animal is not PI for its entire life. We see some producers that will get a positive and then they say, well, Doc, thanks for your work. Hope you have a good day. And they don't take the animal out of the operation. If that's where you end up with a producer, I want to make the argument, why did we test to start with? Why did we do all this? What was going on? So they need to have a plan. They need to enter the program with their eyes open. They need to have a plan for what's their removal process of a persistently infected animal. Then the question of follow-up surveillance. You can go from least cost, least reliable, to highest cost, most reliable in your follow-up. How do you continue to test? This operation was negative. How are we going to continue to monitor for that? It's interesting. You get a group of producers in the room, ask them the question, individual animal testing for BVD is tremendously rewarding to animal health and financial productivity of a farm. Agree, disagree, or conflicted? Boy, you're going to have a lot of interesting questions on that. Be interested to see where a group of producers fall out. If you change the question slightly, we can get 100% agreement. If we change this question simply by adding the words, when PI cattle will be detected. If you know you're going to detect PI cattle on an operation, I can get some real agreement on the fact that it is rewarding to test, it is positive for the financial productivity of the farm. But we're talking about that herd prevalence situation. Where are we going with diagnostic testing? Understand that there is something that I hope to see somewhere picked up and implemented into the industry, trying to change the odds, trying to change the game. Picture of the guy here on the beach. He's got his little shovel. He's out here digging for coins. If I saw a guy on the beach digging for coins without a metal detector, I would think they were crazy. You know, a guy on the beach with a shovel digging for coins. That'd be crazy. What can we do to change the odds of the whole situation? We looked for some type of metal detector that would be low cost, only to try to change the odds of the test. We came up with something, did a little bit of work with it years ago, consumption surface sampling to detect BVD using PCR. Only reason I bring it up again, it's not been adapted. Originally when it was developed and thought of, the thought process was, hey, this thing is so novel, the university, Auburn University, worked to protect it with some provisional patents. And now all of those provisional patents have run out. I would love to see somebody pick this thing up and develop it, simply from the standpoint of yes, we worked out a lot of information on what swab type you should use and that type of thing. But other than working through those details, there's nothing uniquely wonderful in collecting this swab of the feed trough to be able to do PCR, just trying to change your odds. We did it with a group of animals that were commingled, some persistently infected animals commingled with some animals that were seronegative. Then we separated the groups. We continued to test the feed troughs at 20 minutes, 2 hours, 4 hours, 6 hours, and 23.5 hours after animals had eaten from that trough. In essence, long story short, as long as we weren't dealing with a sample that was 23.5 hours after the persistently infected animals ate from the trough, we were able to detect it. We developed some handling procedures, said it's best to refrigerate that sample and then send it in. This is not a foolproof test. This is something that I think some labs could pick up and develop a methodology to change the odds, to know which groups do we need to do more testing on. Maybe that won't work, but how can this be adopted by the industry, hopefully to make a difference at some point? So that study looked at results showing that swabbing within 6 hours after feed consumption is sensitive and a non-invasive method, doesn't require a lot of cattle handling, doesn't require a lot of individual testing, just to know should we do more work in that group. So I say all that just to summarize some current thoughts for you. Hopefully I've provoked some of your thoughts in the situation. Want to go back because I think the foundation is critical. This is not a one-part methodology. You're not going to just simply do detection to get out of this problem. You have to do the surveillance to detect the PI animals, remove them from the operation. That's what I've spent my time on here. We also have to look at biocontainment, meaning don't allow mixture of animals that you're uncertain about their BVD status. Biosecurity, don't bring animals into the operation that are infected. And then vaccination to keep the whole thing in check.